Brexit is in the news, but it's a very different feel today from the last few days of infighting and wrangling and threats that there isn't going to be a deal, or no Brexit, no deal. Well, now all the headlines are very different. Britain and Ireland are said to be on a pathway to agreement. Even Eurosceptic newspapers like the Mail and the Telegraph seem to think a deal possibly can be done. Now, a lot of this information is coming out more from the Irish side than from the UK side. This after a 3-hour meeting between Boris Johnson and Leo Varadkar yesterday on the Wirral in Cheshire. Now, interestingly, of course, they brought us apparently a wedding venue and linking in with those WAG story, also a venue where Colleen Rooney held her 21st birthday party. Who knew? But the shift is now moving, the focus is moving now to Brussels, where this morning Stephen Barclay, the Brexit Secretary, is going to meet up with the EU's chief negotiator, Michel Barnier. If at the end of that it looks like there is something to be discussed, we will then enter what they call the tunnel, not a pathway, but the tunnel, where we actually then have the in-depth technical talks. But what has been agreed and what has been offered and what has been conceded? Well, we'll talk about that a little bit in a moment with Emma Webb and Will Dry. First up, though, let's talk to our first guest of the morning of this hour, Stephen Timms, Labour MP, member of the Brexit Select Committee. Good morning to you, Stephen.
Good morning, Julia.
Very little information, interestingly, is sneaking out from this 3-hour meeting between the two prime ministers. It does seem to be the case, though, that the Irish feel that there have been more concessions made by the British. You were among the MPs last week who sort of entertained the idea that, well, there's a possibility that there could be some sort of deal that could get through Parliament. Is it a possibility, though, that the Prime Minister may have offered a concession too many?
Well, I just don't know. As you say, there's very little information, very little clue this morning what this gleam. There clearly is a gleam in there somewhere of something that I think they might be able to agree about. I hope there is a deal. I imagine we're going to find out more in the course of today as the discussions move to Brussels. But if there is, my view, as we've talked about this before, is that it should be subject to a referendum. Like, people should be asked, now there is a deal, do you want to leave on the basis of this deal, or do you want, now we know the details, do you want to stay in the EU? And I think, if there is a deal, and if that option is considered by Parliament with the idea of a confirmatory referendum, then I think we may have a resolution at last.
And do you think that actually, if there were a vote in the House of Commons, or the prospect of a vote, that actually that would be the requirement, that would be the contingency that on which basis Boris Johnson could actually get a deal through? And if he didn't offer that second referendum, he wouldn't be able to do so?
I suspect that's the case. I think we are close to a position now where Parliament is going to insist on there being a confirmatory referendum for the deal, if there is a deal, and I hope there is.
But again, if we're talking about it as, and again, it's been called a people's vote, a second referendum, whatever you want to call it, reality is, should it not also include the option of a no-deal Brexit? I mean, again, if it's confirming what we were going to do, then we've had a referendum in which it was leave or remain. Well, we decided it was leave. Now let's decide how we leave. I'd be quite happy to have a referendum based on a leave with a deal, leave with no deal. What I wouldn't be happy about is why we'd ever need to have remain on the option. We've already been asked that question and we gave an answer.
Well, but leaving with no deal would be catastrophic. We've talked about this. We've seen the government documents. There would be shortages of food. That's the worst case scenario. The worst case scenario for a blockade. No, it wasn't.
Yes, it was.
It was the reasonable worst case scenario.
Yeah, worst
and it's
case
actually
scenario.
Very likely.
I mean, the worst case scenario is nuclear war. It's a possible worst case scenario if you don't mitigate against the effects of a no-deal, clean break Brexit. But given that we have mitigated, then they won't be.
The fundamental problem is there's a lorry park in Calais which has only got 300 spaces in it, and they'll have hundreds of lorries without proper customs documentation rolling up there the day after we leave without a deal, and that will mean that the ferries will stop and there'll be a massive logjam on the M20. And that will lead to shortages of food and medicine, and in due course of fuel as well. So, actually, this
Don't
week
forget
we've had
the
another
locusts. Stephen,
government
you
report.
didn't get the locusts, and it always upsets me when Remainers forget to mention the plague of locusts.
Yeah,
Honestly, with honesty, Stephen, you and I, we've debated this on many occasions. Look, absolutely, if there are no mitigating attempts to mitigate against a no deal, and no one's got any information, no one knows what paperwork they need, and everyone decides to sort of be as difficult as possible at the ports, then absolutely that would be the case. But given that all the people running the ports, who probably know better than both you and I, say there aren't going to be any problems like that, and given that there's a massive campaign about giving people advice and telling people what paperwork they're going to need, and everyone's going to know what they're going to need, I mean, there might be a few traffic jams for a couple of days, but after that, everyone's going to know what they need.
Just talk to the Road Haulage Association, Julia. They'll tell you exactly what's going to happen. But we had another report this week about the red tape burden on business, an extra £15 billion of red tape if we leave the EU with no deal.
Well, hold on a minute. One of the reasons why people wanted to leave the European Union was because the red tape that's imposed on 95% of businesses that don't do any business with the rest of the EU but still have to carry on under the same rules.
And what we would have to find out is all the massive red tape that's involved in exporting into the EU, which, of course, we've never had to bother about before. We're suddenly going to have to bother with that, and that's going to cost our businesses 15 billion quid. And one of the things that amazes me about all this is we've had years, not very long ago, of the Conservative Party demanding cut red tape, and now they're contemplating adding 15 billion of red tape to British businesses exporting into the EU and importing from the EU, which would be the cost of leaving without a deal.
That would be the EU imposing that. Stephen, that would be the EU imposing that, not us.
Yeah.
The EU, that are lovely friends that you desperately want to stay in a club with, who would be deliberately imposing that, and they'd be imposing it on their businesses as well. Why would that be in their interests?
They already impose it on people who are importing into or exporting to the EU, and we would be subject to it, and that, which of course we never have been before.
I simply have no idea how I managed to buy blueberries from Argentina and lamb from New Zealand. I don't know how these things get into the country.
Well, you certainly wouldn't be exporting lamb to the EU because you'd have to pay a 50% tariff on that. So it would be catastrophic. So no, I don't think we should be opening the door to leaving with no deal. Our businesses would not withstand it, and nobody would forgive politicians who voted for that a few months after it had happened.
Okay.
So I'm certainly not going to be...
Let's talk about some of the details of what might have happened in this meeting between Leo Varadkar and Boris Johnson, though, because there's a lot of concern as to levers I spoke to yesterday. The TUP, the European Research Group, I know some Brexit Party people, very concerned that the Irish seem a little bit too happy, a bit of a spring in their step, and they've been offered more concessions by Boris Johnson. A lot of people felt that he went a long way last Wednesday when he issued that proposal, which involved effectively having two separate borders and a regulatory alignment for the single market for Northern Ireland, effectively a border there between a border down the Irish Sea on when it comes to that, but on customs, Northern Ireland remaining in the UK customs area. There's a lot of talk that the big concession that has been offered is that Boris Johnson basically said he'll leave Northern Ireland in a customs union with the Republic of Ireland and the EU. That will be unacceptable to an awful lot of unionists. Would that be acceptable to you?
Well, I think until we see the detail, it's very hard to say whether it's going to be acceptable or not. I mean, I think part of the background here is that people don't see the current Prime Minister as a trustworthy person. People who have been assured one thing one day find that things are different the following day. And that is one of the complications in all of this. From Ireland's point of view, what they have to be assured of is that there's no danger of them being forced to build customs posts on the Northern Ireland border. They've got to have that assurance, otherwise they can't sign up. And I don't think the EU would sign up to a deal.
I think everyone on every side has promised that that's not going to happen on the border.
Well, nobody wants it to happen.
But they've all categorically pledged that they will not build those actual buildings.
But what the Irish have to be assured of is that the European Court of Justice isn't at some point going to insist on them being built. And if there are going to be customs checks introduced between Northern Ireland and the EU, then at some point customs checks are going to have to be erected. So that's what Ireland has to be reassured of, and it may well be there is some glimmer they've now got of a way that they can be assured of that. We'll have to find out hopefully later today what it is.
Yeah, indeed. We may find out after this meeting, breakfast meeting between Stephen Barclay and Michel Barnier. We shall wait and see. As you say, the devil, we've been saying it every day this week, devil is in the details. Do you have any inkling yet of what has been agreed in principle between the two prime ministers? There seems to be quite a lot of happiness on the Irish side of you that perhaps the Irish have had seen more concessions from the Brits. Any ideas yet on what those offers might have been?
I have no idea.
No one does seem to know.
It's always good if there's something positive, because I think the country has felt negative for too long. So let's wait and see whether this positive mood prevails. My view has always been, in a very positive way, to say, look, this is fantastic, but please put whatever comes back as a deal to the people. Then I'm very positive too.
OK, well, I mean, your party's official policy now isn't just to sort of be opposed to no-deal Brexit, it's to oppose Brexit altogether. And if you had a majority, if you were elected, I mean, it'd be very unlikely mathematically for it to happen, but it could happen in theory. Everything's up in the air these days in politics. You wouldn't even want a second referendum. You would just revoke Article 50. But you're saying that you would be willing to sign up and go along with a Brexit deal as long as it did have the backing of the British people?
That's correct. And let's face it, when you have a general election and each party comes forward with their proposal, let's say Boris Johnson, now he says he wants a deal, but it looks more like he wants to go to the people without a deal. He would take, if he got a majority as a mandate, to go ahead and leave the European Union without a deal. The Labour Party, they put forward that they would renegotiate a deal and then put it to the people. That's their Brexit offer. And each party put a Brexit offer to the people. If they get a majority, they assume that that is their mandate. We Liberal Democrats have always said our position is passionately to stay in the European Union. If we get a majority in a general election, we see that as a mandate to stay in the European Union.
But if you didn't get a majority in the general election, this is the interesting thing is that your party leader Jo Swinson, she's told me and other broadcasters since she's been elected that even if they say there was a second referendum and there was a vote to leave again, she would still campaign against it, not just before the referendum, but she would still try and stop it from happening because she still thinks Brexit's a bad thing. So even if there was a mandate for doing the opposite of what the Lib Dems want, you still wouldn't accept it.
Well, let's put it this way. If the people voted to leave the European Union with whatever is put before them, that is that. But that doesn't mean that as a party going into the future, one would always make the point that we as the UK should be at the heart of the European project. It's the biggest peace project ever seen in history. It's the biggest global market to which we still want to have access. We want to cooperate in security arrangements. We want to data share. In the end, we will always want to be part of something to do with the European Union. Anyway, they're right on our doorstep. Brexit will never end if we leave the European Union, because the European Union will not sink to the bottom of the sea. So let's just stay a member of it, because it makes so much more sense.
But again,
and we would always say that.
This thing, and again, if you want to campaign to return to the European Union after enacting the 2016 referendum, all credit to you, that's what we do in a democracy. But you say, if there was a mandate, if there was a Lib Dem majority and you had a mandate, then you would action it. But why do you think there wasn't a mandate from the 2016 referendum, a vote to 52% to leave? 2017 general election, although Theresa May lost a majority, she actually increased the Tory vote by 3 percentage points. And 80% of MPs who were elected in the 2017 general election said they would deliver and implement the Brexit result. And again, earlier this year in May, the European elections, yes, your party did very well indeed. However, you were absolutely trounced by the result for the Brexit Party. We've had 3 national votes since 2016 onwards, all of which have given a mandate for leave. And you don't accept those mandates.
Well, hang on. If people are asking me, why haven't we left the European Union, don't look at me.
Oh, I'm not blaming you. No, fair enough, I'm not.
But if, why haven't we left? Why haven't we left on the 29th of March? Why don't you ask the Tory party members, why haven't we left? Because people cannot agree how we should leave. And for that reason, it is important to put a precise Brexit deal, be it leaving without a deal, to the people.
Well, OK, then are you saying a referendum should be leave with the deal and leave without a deal? I'd quite happily have that second referendum. What I would object to is having Remain on the ballot paper.
Well, but that is because the question was not asked precisely in the first referendum. That is why we need to go back to the people. And
what wasn't precise about it?
It was what was not precise is how we should leave.
But it wasn't precise about how we remain either. I mean, we know that the movement.
Yeah, hang on, how we remain. Yeah. Remain was very clear because that was membership of the European Union, and
no. The European Union is a body that's constantly evolving. We've seen from what very senior figures in the European Union have talked about in the last few years about moving forward with an EU army, foreign policy, and greater union. We know that the EU evolves as well. People who voted in 1975 thought they knew what they were voting for. They didn't vote for the EU.
Well, okay, membership is evolving, but leaving wasn't even evolving. It was entirely unclear. But let's just face it. It wasn't clear exactly what leaving would look like, and it was always said we need a precise proposal how we would leave in order to resolve this problem. And if you look at polls, it's always split between people who want to leave without a deal and people who want to leave with a deal, and the deal itself is not clear. So put it to the people. Remain is a very clear option. Was always what we as members of the European Union also determine. People always make the EU look like as if it was something that was always running against what the British people or the British government wanted. Britain was at the heart of it. A lot of what happened in the European Union was shaped by Britain. We should be proud members of it because we set the direction for a lot of what happened in the European Union. We are good on the international stage. We should see this as an opportunity to shape the European Union and make it into something that we see as a positive future for us in the European Union. I don't know. I really don't understand why Britain has become so defensive and say, we don't like it. We have been such positive members of the European Union. They want us there. We should stay there. We should be proud of it.
Well, I mean, again, I don't think there's anything negative. I've always seen Brexit as a very, very positive thing to be asking for. But when we do see the whatever, I mean, it's very difficult to discuss the possibility of a deal, given that we don't know, you or I or anybody else other than the immediate parties involved, what is actually being on offer. If we do have that, do you think that would go through the House of Commons? If it was some sort of fudge on customs union, some sort of fudge on the Irish border, do you think that would go through, or do you think it would only go through if there was a promise of a second referendum, and that's what would get the Lib Dem votes and the Labour votes?
Well, first of all, I have always said, and if I would compromise by voting for a deal. Although I do passionately believe he should not leave at all, but I would vote for Boris Johnson's deal if he then compromises too and puts it back to the people. That's my compromise that I put to Boris Johnson.
I've been speaking to quite a lot of people on the Leave side to try and find out what have they heard about this deal. No one seems to know any details other than what has been leaked to the Irish press, which seems to suggest that there have been some concessions made by the British. Do we know what those concessions are? Would they be acceptable to Eurosceptic Tory MPs and indeed the DUP as well?
Well, the DUP is vitally important. We remember that Theresa May forgot about the DUP, despite the fact that without the DUP we couldn't govern. And it was when the DUP said we're not buying into Theresa May's deal that a significant chunk of the Conservative Party couldn't support it either. And so there has been a huge change. That's absolutely clear. But that huge change happened when Boris Johnson himself made a proposition to the European Union. The DUP came on side. The vast majority, from what I can tell from my WhatsApp group of the ERG, came on side as well. And so it's going to be very, very significant for us, the sequencing of events over the next few days. None of us really know what that conversation was in the northwest of England yesterday, except the fact that the optics look incredibly good. We know that Boris Johnson has been on the telephone from 10 Downing Street talking to Angela Merkel, Emmanuel Macron and other EU leaders. And I suspect, actually, their phones have been red hot to Leo Varadkar, the Irish Taoiseach, as well.
Well, they've always made it clear that they're going to be led by Leo Varadkar and the Irish on this. So if they're happy as part of the EU27, then they will be happy.
That's right. It seemed as if Angela Merkel, only 24 hours ago, when she was saying it was very unlikely that a deal was going to be had, Now all of a sudden, you've got this conversation between Boris Johnson and Leo Varadkar, where, quite frankly, they did look like the happy couple yesterday, walking not quite hand in hand, but nonetheless, the mood music was significantly changed. And the sequencing of events now, Julia, is going to be vitally important, because on Monday we've got the Queen's speech, then we've got a few days of discussion about that Queen's speech. Then on Saturday, we've got what we call Super Saturday, which will have been preceded by 2 days of negotiations in the European Union between Boris Johnson and them as to what some sort of deal has been sort of agreed between Leo Varadkar and Boris Johnson yesterday in the Wirral. And then Super Saturday, a deal may well be put before Parliament. We've not sat on a Saturday since 1982 and the Falklands War. And it's going to be significant because we know the Liberal Democrats are not going to vote for this. In fact, Joe Swinson rather disgracefully tweeted yesterday that if a deal was agreed by Parliament, it would be done on the backs of Labour MPs.
Well, we've actually just been speaking to Vera Hobhouse, the Lib Dem MP, and she said that she would agree to a deal if it looked like a decent deal, as long as there was a second referendum, a confirmatory vote. And again, like Stephen Timms, the Remainer, has also said that as well. Would you be happy with that?
Well, no, absolutely not. Absolutely not. No, we said we would deliver on what the British people voted for. And for Joe Swinson to actually say to Labour MPs that Remainers would never forgive them if they supported this. And of course, we've got people like Caroline Flint, Sarah Champion, Stephen Kinnock, who have quite rightly stood by what they said in 2017 at the general election. These are Labour MPs who said that they would deliver Brexit. And it looks likely that if a deal is likely to be put before Parliament, unlike before, under Theresa May's deal, which, of course, Parliament defeated 3 times. And it was only defeated because we couldn't get a significant number of Labour MPs voting for it. This time, they're staring at the option of either supporting this deal or indeed us leaving on October the 31st without a deal. And it seems to me that there's been a huge shift amongst a significant number of Labour MPs sitting in seats throughout Wales and the northeast of England, where they voted leave. And they do not want to let their own voters down. The other thing we've got to remember as well, Julia, is we are possibly only weeks away from a general election. It could be as early as November the 28th. And so a lot of their constituents will be talking to them saying, why are you not voting to get this Brexit deal over the line?
We should see whether there's an early election, because there's now some talk among Labour MPs and pushing Jeremy Corbyn to perhaps row back on the "we're desperate for an election" lines, because they're very worried about losing the election. Let me ask you about some of the detail of, from what the Irish press is saying, RTE, Irish Times and others, talking about this possible Brexit compromise that may well be a compromise too far, because there was a lot of wasn't there, a lot of people who thought that last Wednesday Boris Johnson had made it really quite a big offer in offering to have the effect of these 2 borders, one in the Irish Sea on regulation, and basically keeping the Northern Irish economy in terms of goods within the single market, but not the customs union, 2 different things. But effectively, if there is a compromise on a customs partnership, it's going to be, we're told, possibly the fudge, and it's always going to be a fudge, but basically Northern Ireland leaves the EU customs union, so it's technically speaking part of our customs customs area, but it effectively applies EU customs rules and tariffs on goods. That would be the sort of fudge that could get things through. But would MPs like yourself, would MPs like among the DUP's 10, would they be willing to live with that?
The mood music has changed as well between Arlene Foster and the British Prime Minister. When it was Theresa May, she seemed to forget about the DUP completely, which was rather a surprise, as we did rely on them to
Well, you no
the
longer rely on the DUP because you haven't got a majority even with them anymore.
No, that's true too. But I talked to Arlene Foster a couple of weeks ago when she was in Paul Cullis' house. She was having a chat with Boris. And it's quite clear to me that the relationship between her and Boris is completely different to the relationship she had with Theresa May. She's able to talk to Boris in a far more open way than Theresa really ever had that sort of relationship with her. And so the huge change when Boris made his offer to the European Union was that the DUP were on side. And it's because Boris actually talks to Arlene Foster and the DUP. And I think that is a significant thing too. And so I think what we've got to wait for, and it doesn't matter about leaks, Julia, because you and I know that people are speculating like crazy as to what is happening, what the deal may well be. But I think there's a realization within the European Union, unlike Theresa May, who said we are leaving on March the 29th, deal or no deal. They knew that there's not a chance that she would leave without a deal. The big difference is Boris Johnson, and he actually said this to a member of Parliament who I spoke to recently. They had a private meeting in Downing Street. I won't say who it was, but I said to him, did Boris Johnson mention the date of October the 31st? And he said, yes, he did. This was a one-to-one meeting. Boris doesn't need to ram home this date of October the 31st unless he is absolutely certain that Britain's going to leave the European Union on that date. And he did mention that date. And so I believe the European Union now that we're leaving on the 31st of October. And that has been a huge sea change in expectations on behalf of them as well. We're leaving on October the 31st, Julia. I'm more optimistic that is going to happen than I've ever been before.
Can I also ask you about Brexit? We know that the Brexit Secretary Stephen Barclay is having a breakfast meeting right now with Michel Barnier in Brussels. Of course, the EU chief negotiator. This after that 3-hour meeting between Boris Johnson and Leo Varadkar in the Wirral, where many people were thinking that this was the last-ditch attempt to get a deal. Then lots of very hopeful noises coming out that some sort of deal could be reached, or a pathway to a deal. Do you know what compromise has been offered and by which side?
So I'm feeling as if I've definitely got the better end of the stick, as I'm going to visit schools across Wigan and Liverpool and Lancashire today. So I know I'm definitely going to have a more pleasurable day than Steve is going to have. The Prime Minister has set out his compromise in a very open letter to the European Union. The Prime Minister has made a compromise. It's now time for the European Union to make a compromise.
Are you aware that a compromise has been offered back by Leo Varadkar and by the EU?
Well, that compromise has been set out in an open letter that we've all seen. And actually, this has the ability to, I believe, if we can get an agreement on it, to actually get through the House of Commons. Because the one thing that we saw is when you had the backstop in the last deal, this wasn't something that could get through the House of Commons. And that's why the Prime Minister's put forward a positive suggestion. He's moved on this. It's now time for the European Union to move. That's what Steve will be having that discussion about. I'm sure it'll be a positive discussion.
OK, well, I mean, everyone's saying it's going to be a positive discussion, but there is also a lot of concern on the Eurosceptic side, DUP, European Research Group, indeed the Brexit Party outside the Conservative Party as well, that perhaps too many concessions have been made by Boris Johnson, yet big concession even with the support of the DUP and the ERG last week. But there seems to be a view on the Irish side that there's been yet more concessions from Boris Johnson, which perhaps might not make it through Parliament.
It's always been clear, unless you deal with the issue of the backstop, this isn't something that is going to go through Parliament at all. The Prime Minister is clear on that. But the Prime Minister is even clearer on something else, and that was we're going to exit the European Union on the 31st of October. Frankly, people are sick of Parliament messing about, Parliament not making a decision on anything, just saying what they're absolutely against, as against getting Britain out of the European Union. That's what people want to see. That's what the Prime Minister's going to deliver.
Let's talk about, well, what on earth is happening on the Brexit front? A lot of the papers today reporting that, well, it looks like a deal could now be done on Brexit. This after earlier this week we heard from the likes of Angela Merkel and others that actually is looking highly unlikely. Downing Street sources have said the EU had made it basically virtually impossible for there to be a deal, simply because Boris Johnson had already conceded on the issues of leaving the Northern Ireland effectively for goods in the single market whilst keeping it in a customs union with the rest of the UK. But now, after a 3-hour meeting yesterday at, interestingly, a wedding venue in the Wirral in Cheshire, Boris Johnson and Leo Varadkar emerged to say they could see a pathway to a deal. This suggests that a last-minute breakthrough could be on the horizon. This, of course, heading into next week's European Council Summit on Thursday and Friday, and, of course, what's been dubbed Super Saturday on the 19th of October. Next Saturday is the date when, of course, Boris Johnson is required under the Benn Act, the so-called Surrender Act, as he dubs it, to send that letter to the EU asking for a 3-month extension. It's also the day that the UK government has called back the Parliament, and we expected there would be votes on whether or not we should go for a general election, or indeed, if there's a deal, on whether or not Westminster will go for the deal on offer. But what is in that deal? And is there going to be one at all? Well, let's talk about it all with Anne Widdecombe. She's a Brexit Party MEP and, of course, a former Tory minister. Good morning to you, Anne.
Good morning to you,
Now,
Julia.
it doesn't seem to me that pretty much anyone, other than a very few select people, know what was discussed in detail between Boris Johnson and Leo Varadkar yesterday, and indeed what Michel Barnier and Stephen Barclay are discussing. There has been some hint, though, that there's been more concessions made by the British, and in particular, this idea that this concession made last week by Boris Johnson in his letter to the EU on Wednesday, where effectively, as I say, we leave the Northern Ireland stays in the customs union with the rest of the UK, but on the issue of goods, agriculture, food goods and the like, travelling between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland, it retains effectively a place in the EU single market along with the Republic of Ireland. There's now some talk that effectively Northern Ireland would leave the customs union with the EU along with the UK, but would continue to apply EU customs rules and tariffs on goods in a typical EU-style fudge. Do you think that's the sort of fudge that could leave us to a deal? And would that be the sort of deal that the Brexit Party would stand by?
No, we wouldn't. I mean, that sort of deal is, you've just used the word, it's a fudge. Fudges are not normally sustainable in the longer term. And I'm not surprised at all that all the briefing is that the concessions have been from the British side, because that is how we've been approaching these negotiations from the start. Now, I had thought that Boris was doing it rather differently. He was rowing with the EU, where Theresa May had positively given in on almost everything. I did think he was approaching it differently. If he has made major concessions, you've got to look at the longer term and you've got to say, well, OK, you get what you call a deal. And by the way, there are lots of other things bad about that deal other than the backstop. But you get what you call a deal. But how sustainable is it in the longer term? And what sort of mess are we going to have with Northern Ireland working to a different set of rules from the rest of the UK? So, no, I don't think you'll find anybody from the Brexit Party rejoicing this morning. But, the caveat that we must all acknowledge is we haven't a clue what this new development is.
Indeed, I've spoken to a number of Eurosceptic Tories and the DUP since that 3-hour meeting and the idea of this pathway to a deal, and no information seems to have leaked out. Now, the idea that the information hasn't leaked out suggests that this is a bit more serious, but also suggests, does it not, that perhaps it's something that a lot of people aren't going to be happy with. So how does this play out? Because if there is some fudge and some semblance of a deal, and Boris Johnson thinks he can sign up to something at the European Council, he returns to Parliament next Saturday on the 19th of October. How do you think it's going to play out in the House of Commons? Although you as an MEP, you no longer sit in the House of Commons, but you were a Conservative for many years. In terms of how Parliament breaks down, we know it's got a Remainer majority, but we also know there are some Remainers, there's Eurosceptics who would actually be willing to perhaps to sign up to a deal to avoid a no deal and avoid going on more more extensions, more division. Do you think that this sort of fudge might actually make it through Parliament?
No, I don't. And what I would say, Julia, is what I've said to you before on this programme. The only thing that we are all agreed on is that we don't know what's going to happen. It is utterly unpredictable. As you rightly say, there are all these different factions in Parliament, and a government without a majority, absolutely hamstrung by the Benn Act. You've got a speaker who's apparently, willing to talk to the EU behind the government's back. All these things are going on. It's a complete muddle. And the only way out of this is to come out in a clean break. We've had 3 years to get ready for it. Come out in a clean break and then negotiate from a position of independence. And if there are bits of that deal which benefit both sides, that both sides want, then keep that as a basis. But nevertheless, come out, have done with it, as Philip Hammond, of all people, originally said after the referendum and after the general election in 2017. He sat there on the MAR programme and said, this means we are coming out of the single market, we are coming out of the customs union. And that has got to apply to the whole UK.
In terms of what does emerge and how it gets agreed, there are many Remainers in Parliament, and we talked to a couple this morning who said, look, they'd be willing to sign up to a deal as long as it was subject to what they call a confirmatory vote, and therefore, obviously, a second referendum with Remain on the ballot paper as well. Not a, well, we're leaving, deal or no deal, but also having Remain on the ballot. Would you, in the instance of a second referendum, would you in the Brexit Party, would you be campaigning in that, or do you think that actually that would be a referendum that you wouldn't recognise as having any democratic validity, in which case would you be boycotting it? Have you had discussions about that?
I think the campaigning that would be done would be to show just what a complete Hobson's choice it was. I mean, a bad deal or stay in, give up either way, give up or give up. And that is not a choice with which the nation should be faced. I also think large sections of the general population would be very angry just at the idea of a second referendum. This smacks of governments over the world which have had the answer they don't want from their own people and then have just asked them the same question again. And although there would be a twist on it this time, well, we're not asking you quite the same question. Effectively, this would be a rerun to try and get an answer that the majority of Parliament, but not the majority of the people, want.
And what about in terms of a general election? Because the big fear of the Tories is that they are going to be losing Remainer Tories to the Liberal Democrats and others perhaps. And at the same time, they're going to be losing Eurosceptic Tories to your party. You've been polling really consistently around the 12% mark. At that percentage mark, then Boris Johnson will really struggle to get a majority, even if he does maintain the Tory support he's got. He needs to beat you down to 8% or below for him to be realistically expecting to deliver a majority government to be able to get Brexit through. He said, well, his office in Downing Street has said again and again and again, they will not make a formal pact with your party. They will not do a deal to have effectively a Leaver alliance in the event of a general election. How seriously do you take those no's, those protestations? Do you think that there will be a deal, whether formal, whether informal? And would the Brexit Party, in the event that you believe that, say, Boris Johnson offered a manifesto saying it's a no deal. With me, it's a no deal. I'm not going to try and negotiate anything. It's a no deal. We leave on, February the 1st, whatever it is. That's it. We're out, no matter what. Would you, in that scenario, stand aside?
Well, in that scenario, what we would say to Boris Johnson is what we have already said, which is, look, we want no deal. If you want no deal, we will help you to achieve that. And one of the ways that we can do that is by standing in the Labour heartlands, where people are thoroughly fed up with the Labour position on this and voted Brexit in droves and want to see Brexit delivered. We will stand there and we will therefore help you to get your majority, but it's got to be on the basis of a no-deal Brexit. And we're not going to resile from that position. That is our position.